And hello, guys. And let us begin with the first book, which is I don't have it, but it is the Catholic RSV. This is the Oxford RSV. Let's see. The new Oxford annotated with Apocrypha RSV from the 70s, 1973 edition. This is the one I used in college, but the reason I'm recommending it, the RSV, is because it is the best modern translation for Catholics, the Revised Standard Version. We'll talk about the traditional version the next slide, and I recommend. There's two versions. There's the blue book. It's the one I used to have one. I gave that one away. That was version 1 or first edition. I guess you would call it first edition or version 1. I'm not sure. And then the one that's most common is the second revision of the RSV, the Revised Standard Version, a more literal version. It's very popular in Catholic academic circles, modern, albeit conservative academic circles. So it is very interesting to really realize and share the word in that way. To go back, I used the reason I have this one is because it includes not only the 73 books of the Catholic canon, but also books from the Orthodox canon as well. So I find that interesting, though it tries to be ecumenical. So it puts the dual canonical books at the end with all the other books. So it's literally like a Protestant plus other books in it. And the notes are okay as well. I thought it would be the closest I can get to a Protestant and Catholic Bible without crossing into each other. And I think it is pretty much the best that we can get at this point, because after the 70s, the new Revised Standard Version came on. It's kind of has that gender inclusive language. It's kind of liberal. So I think this is as close as we can get to a being together, I guess. So just get the Catholic RSV, either first edition or second edition. The first edition differences, it has these and thous, and it's kind of like archaic Shakespearean language, like a King James version sort of deal. And the second edition removes that. That's the biggest change that I remember seeing. So in terms of like Psalms and poetry, the first edition, the one in the blue cover there, it flows better, I think. It touches all those old school vibes. But then second Revised Standard Edition is fine as well. This is one of the few ones that I'm going to just wholeheartedly recommend to get, because it has both the Old and the New Testament. The best version is the New Testament Study Bible, which I'll talk about in a second because of the notes. But it's only the New Testament, so they have not released a Old Testament version yet. Yet they have like more than half of the Old Testament books. The 39 books there, the 46 books. Commentaries for those, but not all of them. But they haven't compiled them together to make not only just an Old Testament commentary, but just together Old Testament and New Testament. So that's kind of a shame from Ignatius Press. I tweeted at them to ask them more, would either the Old Testament commentary come or the combined version, and they didn't respond. So there are other RSV versions. There's like the Didache version, maybe I think the Word on Fire version is also RSV. What changes is just the commentary, like the Didache focuses on the 1992-97 Catholic Catechism, and a Word on Fire, I believe, I forget if it touches on the Church Fathers or who it includes, but that is for me the default modern, in a good sense, or contemporary Catholic translation in English. All right, so moving on to the Catholic RSV, we're going to the Douay-Rheims version. Douay-Rheims is like the Catholic King James version. It is the version that we traditionalists would use. I do not have that version together. I have the Old Testament separately with the notes from Father Haydock. So that's why I'm recommending only the Douay-Rheims. It has the older King James-like language. That's the rest. Even though it came first, it's just for argument's sake. Just I think most people in the English language know about the King James version. So think about that old Shakespearean language and words, like instead of Elijah is Elias, and the prophecy of Jeremiah. So instead of the book of Jeremiah, it's just Jeremiah is Jeremiah's, and Isaiah's. So as you can see, it also uses Roman numerals as well. So that is a, a difference. So I have that, but I also have the New Testament as well. So I got them separately. They want to have that it's in the link. It's the one that has them together. It's pricey. It's like 120, or maybe that's new and not used, but hardcover. So that is what I recommend for, I guess, traditionalist readings. And this is my secondary. I don't go to this often except for the notes. So that's why I recommend that your default one should be a Catholic RSV, and then follow up would be the Douay-Rheims with the Haydock translation, just because of both, not only the translation but the commentary. I personally would not just get it because it's the translation, but also I would get it because of the commentary. To me, it's important, and they sell them separately, but yeah, might as well get them together. In both the Old and the New Testament, I have, just because I don't have the hardcover one volume, I just have them separately. So next one I'll talk about is the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible, the Revised Standard Version, 2nd edition by Curtis, Mitch, and Scott Hahn. This is my favorite go-to default Bible. If we had the Old Testament here, then that would be my default Bible in total. But since it only has the New Testament, that's unfortunate. I have both a physical version, a Kindle version, and there's no audio RSV. There probably is, but not by the notes of Ignatius Study Bible. I don't know how that would work. So it's really good because it only touches on the church fathers and the catechism, but just elucidates more of that scholarship from Scott Hahn and his folk. And I think it's going to be the standard till when they eventually come out with one volume of Old and New Testament. It's going to be like the default until there's like a new Douay-Rheims or something coming out, if that ever comes out. So yeah, it's fantastic. Highly recommend. The must buys would be this one. After, I guess, you get the Catholic RSV complete volume, and then for the study notes, get this one. So I almost would get this one out of all of them. If I could only choose one, I would probably choose this one. But the Old Testament is also essential. Although the New Testament, you have to read it like start with the Gospels and New Testament, and then go back to the Old. I think is the best way you can get information out of the Old Testament. So moving forward to, this is now moving away from Bibles. I am talking about more introductions to the totality of the scriptures, sacred scriptures. This is the books that I use as an in-person high school teacher, and it's actually a fantastic book. I had this book before I was a teacher, and I have my version here, actually signed by Scott Hahn, Romans 8:28. So it is a very, it is, so you get a Bible, the best intro or commentary to this scriptures together. I think it's this book. I'm going to show you another one that's, I guess, cheaper, but this is the best one. It's textbook. We use it for ninth graders, but it basically, if you have this book, you're basically all set, especially when it comes to scriptures. It doesn't go as in depth as maybe one would like. For some reason, when I was a teacher, I would start with the last chapters because it tells you how to read the Bible, and understanding it, which I found weird. Like, you have to probably understand that first before you begin. So, for example, chapter 30 is how to read the Bible. To me, that should have been chapter 1. So I usually start with chapter 30 and then start chapter 1. But regardless, that's a small point. This is the complete course edition. I think there's a semester edition that probably cuts it down or divides it differently, but this is the one I'm used to, and it's pretty great. So Scott Hahn, even though his name is not actually, you have to dig in to find his name, but it's beautifully illustrated as well. It's totally orthodox too. So the best contemporary and modern Catholic overall understanding of the scriptures. So this one's here is more for, I want to say beginners, but yeah, it is for beginners, or those who just want a quick and easier way to understand the scriptures. So that's why we recommend the Bible Basics for Catholics. This one here from John Bergsma. I use this book, especially the Genesis 1 with the diagrams. I use that in my class. And I think the best thing about this is the actual stick figures and how that relates to the covenants. Him and Scott Hahn, who also did the introduction here, forward by Scott Hahn. It talks about the covenants as the primary vehicle to understand the sacred scriptures from Genesis to Revelations. The covenants with Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus. I feel like I'm missing someone there. So with Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus, and then the prophets and before Jesus who kind of are like unofficial covenant members: Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Isaiah, or Jedi's. Is that what he said? Acronyms so my students will remember them. So this one, if you're gonna pick one of these, it really depends on what your how much time you have, or if you want to dig deeper. These two will be essentials, and at the end you'll see that on my list of 15 or 20 books, these are two are going to be bolded because I think that they're most crucial. They're all good. All the books I'm going to show here, unless I say otherwise, they're either good to great, and these are great. So he has a New Testament basics for Catholics, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but it kind of repeats a lot of the stuff that's here, and I guess it delves deeper into Matthew, Paul, John, and somebody else, which is weird. Not all 8 named authors, but only 4 that he chooses to talk about. I think Luke maybe, which round out 80 or 70% of the scriptures, the New Testament scriptures, which is great, but just a weird way of doing it. So this is out of his collection. He has I think Psalms basics and also love basics for Catholics regarding with the scriptures. This is if you're gonna pick out of one out of the 4, we'll just pick this one. So, Introduction to the Bible is this book I have here. This is a traditionalist understanding of scripture. I think in the 1920s or 1930s it was written, and this is for I think 11th graders or high schoolers, but it's still a great introduction to the scriptures. Just trying to see the copyright date, 1932, and republished in 1990. And it's still great, especially for traditionalists. And if you're gonna stick to the Douay-Rheims and introduction to the Bible, I guess this is also one that you should have. And this pairs well with and complements the other 2 introductions, the Bible basics, and then the Understanding the Scriptures by Scott Hahn. So this is a part of a series that talks about church teachings, which I have here, and others. I don't have the other ones as well, but yeah, the teachings on it. So I think it's very cool that he has one just on the scriptures, and it's pretty thorough. So I also recommend this one, but I guess maybe not as highly as the other ones, but still a great resource to get. This is a Protestant book, and actually it is 5 books in one that they turn into one big book. It is Hard Sayings of the Old Testament, volumes 1 and 2, Hard Sayings of Jesus, Hard Sayings of Paul, and Hard Sayings of the New Testament, all 5 books put into one, and they said they added books to it as well. It's Protestant in nature. I have their alternate would be Hard Sayings by Trent Horn is the Catholic version. I've seen it, but I haven't picked it up yet because I find I don't know, I find the formatting not as great, but eventually I'll get it. But this one goes through the Protestant canon, so 39 books as opposed to 46, and then 27 New Testament books, and just goes over just issues that arise. Talks about where did the wives of the antediluvians come from, or before the flood? Where did they come from after Adam and Eve got expelled from the garden? So it just talks about difficulties that may come up with reading the scriptures, and while there's Protestants thinks still a good and pretty sizable reference guide. I think there's other books of this genre, but I think this is the default one that you would pick. So I would make it a 2 combo, this one and Trent Horn's, or out of the 2. Maybe I'm being a bad Catholic, I would pick this Protestant version. I think it's just heftier and involves just more broad, and both broad and also deep as well. So paradoxically enough. So and this is by F.F. Bruce, which is a theologian which I follow. I don't know much the other guys, Kaiser, Davids, and Brauch. I don't know them much, but they were authors of the other four books. But FF Bruce, I think, ties it all together. And sometimes when you read it, you can kind of tell it was five books. I think it could have been smoothed out. I think there is a newer edition, so maybe they fix that in the future. But this is a great find. I think I got this used. If it wasn't for that much, less than $10, but it's hardcover. It's great to understand those more difficult sayings in the Bible and what it might mean, and just some theories out there. All good introductions usually tackle those theories, but since this is just focuses on those, I think this is just fun to read just by itself. So. All right. Next is the Catholic Bible Dictionary. This is actually probably my newest purchase, I believe. Physical purchase from the used bookstore. It think of a dictionary, all right? Find your words that you want to do, but it's full of orthodox, Catholic, and deep, scholarly yet understandable. That's the best method, I think. It has to be scholarly yet understandable, and that's what Scott Hahn does as the editor. Obviously, he didn't do all of these entries, but as the editor, I think his seal of approval, and you can tell it just looks great and it feels great. And yeah, every book of the Catholic canon, so the Old Testament and New Testaments, every significant person in the Bible, historical places, key archaeological sites and finds. It is a standard, so I also recommend this one, though this is more like a supplement than a necessity. But if you have I guess the additional space, go ahead and pick this one up. All right, now this is a Catholic introduction to the Old Testament specifically, and these are important, especially for Catholics, since most introductions to the Old Testament are only 39 books, and sometimes they talk about the Apocrypha or the Deuterocanonical 7 books. This one just by default has them in there, assumes their authenticity or canonicity, so that's fantastic. It even talks about the canon. That probably has best canon discussion out of all the books that I have seen. I'm just trying to look where it is here, if I can briefly show that. Because it kind of shows not only the canon, but what different church fathers thought about it in different time periods, whenever they list the canons and whenever they mention the books. Here we go. So here we have some of the different councils and different canon lists and which books were included and which were not. So you can tell that it's actually pretty complicated. It's not simple as I wish it would be, because if it was simple, I guess the discussion of which books belong in the Old Testament canon would be simpler and not as difficult. It really boils down to authority. This is my favorite patristic use. Information of the Deuterocanonical books just goes over some of the books, Deuterocanonical books in the top, and then some of the church fathers. And it says which ones mention them and which ones mention them as being part of the canon explicitly, and some hinted at that or some that just mentioned them. So, and what makes this different? I guess what makes it different is that it talks about each book of the Old Testament. Although I think I get a little fast and loose when it gets to the 12 minor prophets. I think they could have done. I was looking for the conclusions because I like looking at the conclusions of each book to see what they have to say, but they lumped them all together. And I was a little disappointed by that. So, and I think when it comes to maybe first and second Maccabees, maybe that's a bad example. I think they lumped them together, but it is this is a grade A book if you're the best Catholic introductions to the Old Testament. I hope they come out with a New Testament introduction like this. In some ways, the Ignatius New Testament commentary study Bible is like that, but it's not as in depth. This being stick allows it to be in depth, so it just talks about the book. It doesn't, it's not the readings and then the commentary. It's just the commentary. With obviously it has to refers to the readings, but yeah, it's fantastic, and it's newer. It's the early 2010s or late 2010s as well. So This is a force to be reckoned with. I think it took 10 years to make. And it's Brant Pitre and John Bergsma. Bergsma, we talked about, he did the Bible basics, and Brant Pitre did the Case for Jesus, which I raved about earlier in my other affiliate links bookshelf GRIFT video. So yeah, another I recommend is A Catholic Introduction to the Old Testament. What I have here is a Catholic Guide to the Old Testament, a Great Adventure Bible. The best thing about the Caven's Great Adventure series is the color-coded time periods where each book is set to take place. It's fantastic. With that, you kind of know that, book like Job is really kind of set before the patriarchs, after Genesis 12, or between Genesis 1 and 12, and then Genesis 12 to 50. So Genesis 1 through 11, and then maybe put Job in there, and then Genesis 12 to 50. So right after the Tower of Babel narrative, but before Abraham, that's probably where a book of Job best fits in, and it colors it there. I guess you can argue with some of the harder prophets. It's harder to date those, but it's a good book. It's just not as, to my opinion, not as scholarly as A Catholic Introduction to the Bible, the Old Testament, by Pitre and Bergsma. But it's also worthwhile. It's just, out of the two, I'll definitely recommend the Bergsma Pitre book. But visually, they complement each other. So get both. But if you're only going to get one, get the Pitre book. So, all right. Now, I have here, we're kind of moving into the New Testament era, the synopsis of the four Gospels. And what it does is it chooses a particular biblical narrative in the Gospels, and then it shows you how it's represented in the book of Mark, book of Matthew, I should say Gospels, right? The Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And sometimes, like the Last Supper, or the memorial meal, as it's called here, it's references St. Paul in 1 Corinthians when it reaffirms Jesus' words. So I think it's very interesting to see how you have sometimes one event and how it's portrayed and what it changes due to the audience and the circumstances. And how some stories are not in four, very rare they are in the four Gospels, right? But how a lot of them are in the three Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then sometimes it's just in Matthew and John, or some parents that you wouldn't think that would be there. This is more like a supplemental as well. I recommend the RSV, not the NRSV. So that's the recommendation link that I have below, is the synopsis of the four Gospels for the RSV. It's also an online. You can search it there. When I was an in-person teacher, that's one of the assignments, was to pick a specific narrative. I make sure that I didn't pick the same one. The students, well, it was four. I picked three out of the four for them, and they can choose one. And from there, they can tell me the differences and why there were differences, just so you can see that all truth is God's truth, and there is truth in there, but just how each book is still unique, and how what each author may have wanted to say about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Interesting. And now, this is from one of my favorite Protestant scholars, Craig Blomberg. Though I have a caveat. I have here the Jesus in the Gospels talks about the historical Jesus, or Jesus, the historical method, and also Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the life of Jesus. So that's basically four Gospels, and talks about Jesus and his background. I mentioned it also earlier when the Jesus historical video I did. And it has a sequel, which is from Pentecost to Patmos. Pentecost, in Acts, and then Patmos, the island where John was exiled to in the book of Revelation. So from Acts to Revelations. The other books, so these two together make the 27 books of the New Testament. Protestant, but it still has some good theology, and that it's pretty much it's pretty great. The only issue is that I have the second edition of Jesus in the Gospels. The third edition is fine. That's the one I linked below, and you can get that one. However, I disagree with the newer edition from Pentecost to Patmos. Craig Blomberg decided to add another theologian for the newer edition, and he should have stuck to the original. So I am linking just to the original first edition of From Pentecost to Patmos. In my humble opinion, it's a better, superior version. I guess it's not the end of the day, end of the world if you get the second edition, newer version, but I would stick to his original. It's still pretty great. And it has some, again, it has Protestant, but I think it's still very helpful. And there's no good New Testament. Well, that's not true. It's just one that I haven't found that's just strictly New Testament, like that Pitre Bergsma Old Testament introduction. There's not a good New Testament which is strictly for Catholics that's contemporary, at least in my opinion. So, right, Blomberg, I think we're getting towards the end of the books that I have, and that is the New Testament Basics for Catholics. And I briefly mentioned this earlier when we talked about the Catholic Bible Basics for Catholics. So he picks Matthew, Luke, Paul, and John as this 4 members that he's going to talk about that's going to represent the books of the New Testament, leaving out Peter and James and Jude. And one more. There's 8 named biblical authors in the New Testament. I'm trying to remember who they are. We have Matthew, Luke, Mark, of course, Mark. But it just gets more in depth, and chapter 1 and 2 summarize the Bible basics, at least the Old Testament have, and then the New Testament just kind of digs deeper. So this is a supplemental. Like, I would just get the Bible basics and then go back to the other ones. Psalms, okay. I have not read or looked at love. I don't know what that one's about and what it represents. But Bergsma, actually, if you're just going to pick one Bergsma, I got the Old Testament introduction or the Bible basics for Catholics, but this is pretty good as well. And let's see what the other books, following ones are ones that I did not, these I don't have, but I would love to get soon. Ancient Christian Commentary on the Scriptures, a 30-volume set. It's just basically the scriptures with the commentary all from the Church Fathers, though there's kind of caveats. Number one, it's a Protestant formulation. So you don't know when some words like presbyter, is it going to be translated into presbyter or it's going to translate into priest? And so they make those. And also the fact that it's a commentary. Okay, so we're going to read Genesis 1, and it's going to have a bunch of church fathers. Who gets to pick what church fathers get to be in there, right? I'm assuming they're going to pick the best, the ones that talk about it the most, and the ones that seem to have the most impact, right? But I don't know their criteria. So it's kind of, maybe there has to be a Catholic edition in the future, but it's still a great idea and it's still a net positive. So I guess that's going for it. And the ones I've seen is the actual hardcover. They have the link I have below for the soft covers because they're cheaper. I think it's $1,500 for the sets, a 30-volume set. And it does include the Dual Chronicles. I think they have it as the Apocrypha, its own volume, but I think it's fun to see what the church fathers said about certain passages, and when you dig deeper into the early church, you see how liturgical it was and how it really resembles a primitive but still functionally the same version as a high liturgical church, and very orthodox in the Big O or Catholic or Lutheran or Anglican or Episcopal sounding and looking, in my humble opinion. N.T. Wright and Michael F. Bird have a New Testament introduction of their own. So it's a competition or a companion to Greg Blomberg's. It seems very fantastic. It seems pretty great. It feels like this is the N.T. Wright book to get after his Christian Jesus of History series and Paul. So you get those 4 books and then you get this one and you're done with N.T. Wright because you got all that he had to say about his scholarship. So it's one that I hope to visit soon, but I recommend it now. And because I looked through it and it looks great. So it's Protestant, but it looks pretty great. And it looks like it's a worthy contender along with Blomberg. So let me see here. This is the list that I have of the books that I talked about. And the ones in bold are the ones you should really get. So I have here the Ignatius RSB. It doesn't have to be Ignatius, just get a Catholic RSB, whichever it is. And then and specifically get the New Testament Study Bible after that, Understanding the Scriptures, the textbook from Scott Hahn, and Bible Basics for Catholics, a John Bergsma book. And then I have here the Catholic Introduction to the Bible, the Old Testament, as my other must-have book at all these. I have here some other ones, just for funsies, I guess. This is a Greek New Testament. The New Testament is written in Koine Greek. It's an interlinear Bible. It has unfortunately, it has NRSV on the side, but we'll let it go, right? And it has the Greek and then what the word means. So it's very wooden, but this is how I kind of learned when I did New Testament Greek. I could read, especially John's Gospel, which was the finer Greek. NRK in the beginning was the word. That's what I remember from it. But so Greek New Testament. This is a book that I used, a New Testament Greek for Beginners by Machen. I didn't realize that he was a great Protestant hero. So there's that. And then here's some Greek words, what they mean in their simple definition. So these two together helped me learn basic or rudimentary Koine Greek to be able to read this. I don't have it as a link below, but just wanted to, show off, in a sense, what I have. For us traditional Catholics, we have here the Latin. Let me see here. So 4 columns or 2 columns per page in English and Latin, right? So the Vulgate here, it's just the New Testament and the Psalms. I guess it could fit in the Psalms here. So it's it's just, since if you're traditionalist, I think this is just a good way to just take a peek and read. If you're going to read the Gospels, or you might as well read it differently, right? And try to catch up on your Latin. 2 more books here before I wrap up my list. I have here NIV commentary. The 39 books of the Old Testament is missing those 7 books, and then 27 books of the New Testament by F.F. Bruce as the general editor. So it's a good commentary on that. It's Protestant, but I kept it because I trust F.F. Bruce. So for the most part, it's a net positive. So it is a good book. The one that's not a net positive is the next one I'm going to talk about, the last one. And I don't know why I have it, maybe for nostalgia, when I was a master's degree graduate student, I should say. That is the New Jerome Biblical Commentary. There's a Jerome Biblical Commentary by the same guys, and then there's a newer one that came out that includes chicks now, or women theologians. So that should be the most up-to-date one. But it's Raymond Brown and his folks and his friends. Father Raymond Brown, Father Joseph A. Fitzmyer, and Father Roland Murphy. Hopefully they reconciled themselves with God before they passed away, but it looks like I had notes and I used it when doing my thesis, probably, or other, as this was supposed to be like high scholarship. It is like the best without being heretical, I guess, at least in a modern contemporary sense. But Hahn and Brant, Pitre, and Bergsma do the same thing, but do it in a more orthodox, more Catholic sense. These people want to be loved by the world, and Protestants who hate us, so the bad part, they want to be loved by the world, so they give away too much and they don't defend the faith as much. So this one sometimes comes up, and I have it, so I just wanted to show it off, I guess. But I would not recommend this book either editions or versions. So I would stick to the list I have, which I'll make larger right before we wrap up here.